Welcome everyone. We're just gonna give it a few more seconds to get started. Alrighty, I think we should be good to go. Alrighty, so welcome everyone to the third and the Campaign for College Opportunities 5-part Advancing Higher Education Equity speaker series. This series is designed to feature California's higher education leaders discussing key priorities in college access, completion, and racial equity. In the midst of the nation's racial reckoning and an economic recession. So today we're going to be discussing racial equity on the ballot in this November's election, and particularly with Propositions 15 and 16, which are two ballot measures that will reinvest in our schools and end a legacy of legal discrimination in contracting, hiring, university admissions, and more, that has excluded too many talented Black, Latinx, Native American, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander Californians. So to start off, my name is Vincent Rosso. I'm the chair of the UC Student Association for the University of California. And that's an organization representing over 280,000 students. Yeah, so UCSA proudly endorses Propositions 15 and 16. And, you know, on a personal level, I am a student at the University of California, Riverside. I'm a fourth year majoring in political science. And just from my experience, you know, in several different student advocacy spaces, I think it has been extremely important for us in our student leadership roles to advocate for the empowerment and uplifting our most marginalized communities. So from my perspective going into this election, it's just been extremely critical to do what we can on our part to make sure that our peers are successful and have the access in higher education. And so I'm really proud to stand with UCSA and on this panel of some really phenomenal leaders across California's higher education and advocating for Prop 15 and Prop 16. And so some really quick housekeeping. So we will have time to take your questions toward the end of the program. So as we go along, you can type your questions into our Q&A section on your screen, and then you know, let us know who each of your questions is being directed to. And yeah, so before we get into our discussion today, we wanted to check with you, with our audience in advance via a poll. And so we have joining people from us across the state. So if you could just take a second to respond to this poll right here. Thank you, Shay. So please take a second to respond to the poll that has popped up on your screen, and you know, just tell us who you are, who you're dialing in as. Alrighty, awesome. So it's good to see we have a really great representation of folks across higher education and community advocates on our webinar today. So thank you all for taking the time out, and we really look forward to our conversation we're going to have with our leaders today. All right, so to start us off, I wanted to go ahead and introduce one of our speakers for Proposition 16. So just get started, we have Vincent Pan, the co-executive director of Chinese for Affirmative Action, and also Yes on Proposition 16 Steering Committee's co-chair. And joining him, we have Dr. J. Luke Wood, the distinguished professor and Vice President of Student Affairs and Campus Diversity. So both of these individuals joining us are strong supporters of Proposition 16. And I wanted to go ahead and you know, go through a series of questions for you both, really just to kind of elaborate on this proposition and a lot of the reasons why it's supporting us and how it'll benefit the state of California across several sectors. So to start off with Vincent, can you talk to us about what Proposition 16 does?
Sure. Before I do that, I just want to thank the Campaign for College Opportunity for having us this morning. And thank you, Vincent, for all that you're doing as well. And it's just great to be here with Luke and with Ben and everybody. So Proposition 16 is on the ballot. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions of California voters have already voted on Prop 16, and everyone else will have the chance to do that by next Tuesday. Proposition 16 ends the ban on affirmative action and levels the playing field for women and people of color in California, which begs the question, why do we have a ban on affirmative action in California? And so it's probably important just to give a very, very short history of that. California is actually one of only 9 states that has a ban on affirmative action. And just to be even more specific, it's actually a ban on affirmative action in the public sector. So in the private sector, affirmative action is legal. But about 25 years ago, one of the most notoriously anti-immigrant elected officials, then Governor Pete Wilson, was looking for a way to make a name for himself on the national stage as he contemplated a run for president. And he seized upon this idea that affirmative action was reverse racism against white people. And so, with that, he put on the ballot something called Proposition 209, which was designed to end affirmative action, but do it in a way that was very deceptive. And so basically what Prop 209 said and did was to amend our state constitution to prohibit preferential treatment for any groups around race, gender, and ethnicity, as well as to ban discrimination. But I think what's important, because it's still very relevant now, is that ban on discrimination was completely unnecessary. There are other parts of our constitution, other parts of state law, other parts of federal law that already banned discrimination. But the trick was to try and equate affirmative action with discrimination against people from more advantaged or privileged groups. And so what Proposition 16 simply does is it repeals that part of the state's constitution so that affirmative action can be legal again. It does not mandate it, it does not require it, it simply removes the ban so that different public institutions can consider race and gender in a very narrow and constitutionally sound way in order to address discrimination, in order to address issues of diversity and equity.
Thank you, Vincent. That was a really great response. And kind of just to follow up on that, I really wanted to, you mentioned Proposition 209, 1996, back before I was even born. And I really wanted to elaborate on why you feel that affirmative action is necessary and needed in California. You mentioned that we're only one of 9 states in the entire country that bans it. And so I'm wondering if you can kind of elaborate on how did Proposition 209 impact diversity in the state of California, and why do you think affirmative action is needed in our current day, 2020?
Sure. Well, I think affirmative action really grew out of the civil rights movement and, a long overdue recognition that the status quo in this country has been one built upon oppression of people of color, oppression of women in many different ways. And so in order to rectify that, in order to fix that, you had to take affirmative action in order to address both structural racism and systemic discrimination against women. After Proposition 209 passed, what we saw was a slowdown of progress that had been made up to that point for both women and people of color. I'll just give a couple of quick examples. Prop 209 specifically referenced public contracting, public employment, and public education. So in the area of public contracting, about $1.2 billion, that's what it'd be, $1.2 billion a year were lost from or stolen from, taken away from businesses owned by people of color and women. And so if you think about the impact of that over a 24-year period of time, right, we're talking close to $30 billion that not only would have gone to those businesses, but would have gone to the communities that have historically been left out. Right? So in the area of public contracting, we see a huge impact in terms of long-term consequences for different communities to be able to deal with income inequality, wealth gap, poverty, on and on and on. In the area of public employment, and I think we'll talk about this more later too, but just one stark example. About 3/4 of our K through 12 students are students of color, but only 1/3 of the teachers are people of color, right? And so you think about how important it is to have role models from backgrounds that are both similar and dissimilar for students. And we have lots of research that shows that that makes a big impact on student learning. But in the area of our education workforce, we have not been able to do what we need to do to make sure that the diversity of our faculty and staff at the K through 12 level, and this is true in higher ed as well, but at the K through 12 level, really reflect the student population. And then lastly, in terms of public education, I think we'll get into this more specifically, but we still have a very, very dramatic underrepresentation for some students of color. And in specific fields, we also have dramatic underrepresentation for girls and women. So if you think about, say, science, technology, engineering, math, the STEM fields, under Prop 209, we cannot have, for example, a science camp for girls to encourage them to think about, that field because it's considered under Proposition 209 to be gender discrimination. So there's a whole host of impacts that negative impacts that came about as a result of Proposition 209.
Thank you for your response. And I think definitely being a student for me for the past 4 years in college, it's been really like I can attest to the experience of say like advocating in Sacramento for supporting diverse communities like in targeted retention programs. It's been really difficult. I know the UC has done pitched measures to work around Prop 209 and try to support its diverse communities. But right now I really want to shift the focus over to Luke and ask, why is Proposition 16 or can you share with us first how the impact of Proposition 16 will have on K through 12 and also on higher education?
Absolutely. And again, very grateful to be here and have opportunity to participate in this panel with a bunch of great people doing great work. And as said, my name is Luke. I'm a professor and administrator, not representing my institution today, just my own perspectives and beliefs. In terms of the Prop 16, the impact it will have, I mean, in many ways, I think about it as the long and ongoing conversation in education around equity versus equality, right? When people talk about equity, they talk about recognizing that there are different groups that have different experiences and different challenges. And so therefore, from an equity-minded standpoint, we have a heightened focus in certain areas to try to address those differences, recognizing that not everyone's the same playing field, right? As a person who's Black and has experienced that my whole life, that's a real issue versus equality, which is this kind of notion that we're going to treat everyone the same and do everything the same. But in doing so, we were not going to be open to see, recognize, consider the fact that there are differences, right? And so there's just been this ongoing conversation, particularly in community colleges over the past 10 years, looking at what is equity, what is equality. And in many ways, this conversation directly parallels that, right? Because it's the notion that we can go beyond what we're currently using to make decisions that are absolutely critical to access and success. But but Prop 209, as was mentioned before, was really built on a myth of meritocracy, right? This notion that everyone has the same playing field, and the people who do well, it's because they worked hard, right? And so we're going to artificially ignore all that other stuff that we know is taking place and just pretend like it's the same playing field. But in doing so, we will now advantage those who already have advantages, which is what Prop 209 did. And that was why this is so important. I know you said that you weren't around when this was done. Well, I remember I was at Sac State as a student when Prop 209 was being discussed. I remember seeing Ward Connerly speak and talk about the importance of upholding and maintaining civil rights and equal opportunity, and using buzzwords and code words that everyone would normally say, oh yeah, it makes sense, except that the ultimate end itself was, of course, very nefarious. How I think about it in terms of what is going to be the biggest asset for me and in terms of the work that I do is really around how we think about admissions and how we think about hiring. And those are two really important points that are going to be able to come from this. So right now, if you go to a UC, right, and some of the CSUs, SLO and San Diego State, right, you're going to apply, and it's going to be based upon a whole different set of background factors, right? They're going to consider what leadership that you did when you were in high school. They're going to consider what neighborhood that you might have come from. They are going to consider what diversity of experiences you had, the classes that you took. They're going to take all these different factors and then say, okay, whether or not this person should be part of our institutional organization. But because of Prop 209, we've never really been able to have a conversation about race. So we can use proxies, right? We can say, hey, we're going to look at a school and the percentage of students who are underrepresented minorities, but we can't look at an individual and look at their individual background and say that that would be even one small modicum of the conversation, with the exception of tribal affiliation. But of course, that doesn't apply in the same type of way because it's usually applied as a federally recognized tribes. We have members who are Native American who aren't part of a federally recognized tribe, or indigenous who aren't from the United States historically, or the man-made border walls that have separated communities from community. And so as a result, we've been able to have some workarounds with some communities, but the larger picture about our Black, our Latinx students in particular, we've never been able to do that. And here's why this matters right now. Right now, colleges are moving away from this whole notion of admitting students based upon high school, not just high school GPA and test score. The SAT, the ACT, the GRE, they're being thrown out. And this is an opportunity now to consider other factors that are more relevant and more experiential, that is going to help institutions make better decisions. Because after 209 went through, we saw a precipitous decline, particularly in Black populations across a number of different institutions. And save our community colleges here in California, right? Most institutions of higher education have not done a good job of bringing in students, right? Unless they're an open access institution. So we have some major structural issues that were created by this, and this is now going to create a much more level playing field. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm excited about it for us, in terms of what it can hold, in terms of not just the students who are coming into our institutions, but also thinking about who are the teachers, who are the faculty and staff that serve them. Do they come from the same communities? Do they look like them? We've never been able to consider those factors. We've always had to do workarounds. Like right now, if I'm gonna try to hire a diverse faculty, I have to basically use criteria that says I'm gonna look for someone who has a demonstrated record of success in research, teaching, or service focused on X populations, right? But I can never say I'm going to hire a Black faculty member or a Latinx faculty member. And if we look at the massive underrepresentation, in particular of Latinx faculty to Latinx students in California, is a major issue. And this is one of the main things that can help us change it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you for really looping in the impact and the necessity of Prop 16 for California community colleges, for the CSU. And I definitely know, coming the UC Board of Regents decision that was made on the SAT, ACT, and a lot of other different issues when it comes to college admissions and access to college. Like, there's a lot of concern over the fact that, folks are able to pay their way into our universities, but really, what are we doing to make sure that folks like the research that's gone into the fact that your zip code, where you grew up is more predictive of a lot of other factors, and we can't really even acknowledge the race and gender aspects that are really a huge monumental part of our lived experiences. And I think with that, you know, really analyzing the current climate across this country, and looking at its long history of racism and oppression within our institutions, and recent protests against police violence and against you know, systemic racism and discrimination. I wanted to ask a follow-up question to Luke about why Proposition 16 is particularly critical at this point in time.
Well, I would say that it's particularly critical at this point in time, of course, in context of everything that we've seen with the racial unrest in this nation, right? For many of us, we've been awakened to these issues for our whole lives because we've lived them and experienced them. But for a large segment of our society, the first time they realize that racism is a real thing is seeing George Floyd being, you know, murdered on television, and that being played over and over and over and over again for 8 weeks, right? And then Walter Wallace and Jacob Blake and Breonna Taylor and Sandra Bland and Tony McDade from the transgender community. We have to look at, like, our nation is at a tense point right now, right? In addition to that, we've seen, and I can say this as an administrator who works in higher ed, we've seen a significant increase in both hate crimes and crimes that fall just below that, right? So we are in an intense moment as a nation, and this is an opportunity for us to send a positive message that we can have a different way of operating. So in that context, this is critical, this is important. Anti-Blackness is real, anti-indigeneity is real. These are real issues. But in the context of California, like, if we think about the fact that this state is becoming, I mean, and continues to be increasingly Latinx, and we look at the student population, right, in our community colleges, and look at the sea of Latinx students who are in our community colleges, who are going there, who are trying to do good work. And the fact that you as a student won't be able to go into the classroom most of the time and be in a classroom with someone who looks like you, right? Whether it's from the student perspective, but more so from the faculty perspective, right? If I'm not gonna be in the classroom with someone that looks like me, will I ever feel that this is designed for me, that I can have a sense of belonging, that I can feel welcomed and connected? And now I don't wanna pretend like this is gonna be the silver bullet that's going to affect all racism, but it's certainly part of one of the elements that we need to be able to address some of these issues. And from my perspective, if we think about the large percentage of our students who are Latinx, and the embarrassing percentage of our campus leaders and faculty and teachers that are Latinx, and people say that Prop 209 was meant to undo discrimination. Well, discrimination is all it produced. Discrimination is all it advanced. And this is an opportunity for us to right a wrong that was made by our predecessors.
Thank you so much again, Luke. And yeah, I just wanted to thank both of you, Vincent Pan and Luke Wood, for joining us, and really kind of to close off our conversations regarding Proposition 16. I just wanted to direct one last question to Vincent. If you could just share with us the really broad, diverse coalition of folks, and touching on like some of the bigger names of people who are supporting Proposition 16, and really what kind of opposition that we see when it comes to empowering diversity in our public, across our public and institutions in California.
Right. Well, Prop 16 is fortunate to have the support of UC, CSU, community college leadership, the California Faculty Association, Teachers Association. So pretty much everyone who works in education is in support of Prop 16, but it's also broader than that. We have support from all the leading business organizations. They know how important diversity and equity are to be able to make sure everyone can participate in our economy. We have support from all the leading labor groups as well. And so that's not common to have such strong support from both business, big business, small business, as well as labor. Even in terms of elected leadership, Senator Bernie Sanders, Senator Kamala Harris, pretty much every elected official on the Democratic side in California is in support. But I do want to highlight maybe some endorsers and supporters in particular, because I think it's especially relevant now. So when you look on the business side, some of the leading business supporters have been from the health field, Kaiser Permanente, Blue Shield, Ultimate, and to understand why, I think close to 40% of our state's population now is Latinx, and only about 4% of practicing physicians are. And so, when we talk about any one part of the spectrum of our society, let's just take education, that has long-term impacts all over the place, right? And so in this COVID pandemic, when we read these horrible headlines about how people of color are literally dying at disproportionate rates, where almost all of the child deaths from COVID-19 are Black and brown students, we have to understand that we have to intervene much, much earlier. And part of that has to do with making sure we have a more diverse workforce in our health fields. And so, that's one big reason why those health organizations are in support. On the other side, I think there's, our main opposition is confusion. Our main opposition is being able to explain on a very, very crowded ballot in a very, very heated election season across the country, what Proposition 16 is. And so this is where everyone here can be very, very helpful to get the word out, to make it clear that Prop 16 does not mean discrimination. It does not mean quotas. So, those are, I think, who the real opposition is.
Alrighty. Yeah, thank you so much, Vincent. And I've definitely been following the campaign. It's been a real pleasure just seeing, all of these really great leadership, join the coalition. I was really excited to be with the UC Student Association, unanimously endorsing yes on 16. So thank you, Vincent, Pan, and Luke Woodward for joining us. And if y'all could just, stay on the line until the end of the call, we're gonna move into our next segment, which I'm really excited about. I know we did talk about, or I brought up, how, our communities, a lot of the opportunities and the inaccessibility to opportunities is really driven by, the communities we come from. And we really see a lot of opportunity to correct that and empower our schools and local communities with Proposition 15, which is also on the ballot right before Prop 16. And so with that, I really want to shift the focus over to two really amazing guests we also have on the call. So we have Vanessa Aromeo and Ben Grief. And with that, I wanted to introduce Vanessa Aromeo. She is the Executive Director of Alliance for a Better Community. And Ben Grief is a campaign director and spokesperson of Evolve California. Both Vanessa and Ben lead organizations that endorse Proposition 15. And I just wanted to thank you both for taking the time out to join us today. And so with that, my first question for both of you, or for Ben, I'm sorry, is if you could start us off by really detailing what is it that Proposition 15 does?
Great. First of all, thank you all for organizing this. These are two incredibly important propositions that we have on the ballot. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, be speaking on this issue with these other great folks. Really, what Prop 15 does, I kind of want to talk about what it doesn't do first. And the most important thing to know about this proposition is it does not affect any residential property whatsoever. Right. Our well-funded, corporate-backed opposition has spent $60+ million so far trying to confuse people into thinking that somehow Prop 15 is going to change anything with any residential property taxes. It does not at all. But what it does do is it makes large commercial property owners pay fair market value in property taxes, just like they have to do in every other place in this country. That's it. It's so simple. It's so easy. This is not some radical idea. This is just doing what they do in Texas and Oklahoma and Mississippi and everywhere else in this country. So it's really important to know that and to talk to folks that haven't had an opportunity to vote yet and to make sure that they are aware this is a very common sense initiative. Because right now we have a situation where some of the largest, wealthiest corporations and investors in this country are paying property taxes based on whatever their land was worth 30 or 40 years ago, right? And that has robbed our schools and our local communities of $150 billion over the last 40 years. So that's a lot of money that has taken right out of our communities and gone right into the pockets of some of the wealthiest corporations and investors in the country. And so that's what Prop 15 will do. We're going to close this loophole, right, to make sure that we're bringing in reliable, stable revenue up to $12 billion a year into funding our schools, into funding our cities and our counties and our special districts. So this is all revenue that we can count on every year that's reliable and stable. Right? It's so important that we talk about this. This is local money. This is going to nothing in Sacramento, right? This is not going to that black hole. This is going to right here in our communities. We have specific revenue estimates where you can see exactly how much your school district is going to get, how much your city is going to get, how much your local parks are going to get, how much your local public transportation systems are going to get. We have all those numbers because it's local money. So this is a really exciting initiative. This is something I have personally been working on for the last 7 years, but folks have been really working on this and talking about doing this for decades. And this is something we sort of can talk about this later, but it is something that we desperately need to have to move our state forward, but especially to move our communities forward, right? This money has hurt low-income communities. This has hurt communities of color the most. And this is a huge step forward to making sure we're closing this loophole and giving us the resources that everybody deserves.
Thank you, Ben. And also kind of what I had posed to Vincent, if you can actually touch base on Proposition 15, the campaign itself, and what kind of groups we see that are in support of this measure and this initiative, and really like why, like I know Vincent touched on like the healthcare industry or the healthcare field is really in support of Prop 16. So yeah, if you can kind of elaborate on really what the coalition that we've put together for Prop 15 and really why they're spearheading this initiative for our communities.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, you know, we certainly have the support of, you know, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, Gavin Newsom, you know, all those folks, you know, who hopefully we're going to be going out and voting for. They're behind us. But really, this initiative was spearheaded by community organizations, by faith-based groups, by labor unions. Really, we all came together because we realized that we just have to have this for California. You know, that right now we unfortunately have a situation where we are in desperate need of revenue. And we were honestly in desperate need of revenue before all of this happened. But now even more so, we're facing unprecedented budget deficits, right? We're facing unprecedented wildfires. Our state is really in a bad situation right now. And this is an opportunity to generate revenue without having to increase taxes on individuals, right, and working families and small businesses. And so, you know, we've got community groups, we've got, like I said, faith-based groups, labor groups, you know, we've got the ACLU on board, we have environmental groups on board, we have housing advocates on board. I mean, this is something that's been supported by, you know, school districts, city councils, county board of supervisors. You know, this is something where, you know, everybody honestly on, you know, sort of the left side of the political spectrum is on board with this because they understand how critical this is for our state to move forward in the direction that we want to. So it's something we certainly have healthcare advocates as well on board. There is just really not enough time to really list all the different organizations, but this is definitely something supported by lots of different folks and a lot of great groups.
Thank you, Ben. Yeah, and I'll just like I've seen the list. It's a very, very substantial one. And you mentioned like states like Texas and other states across country assess their taxes in a similar fashion. So definitely, I think it's something that California is behind on. If Texas is ahead of us on something, we definitely need to it definitely spearheads the reason for something like this. And yeah, and then and you mentioned really moving forward, and I think a big conversation that I've had as a student leader in my campus has been COVID-19, the pandemic, and how it's impacted our communities. Actually have a baby nephew. He's turning 3 soon, and I also have a ton of different cousins and stuff that are really put in this situation where they are learning remotely, learning the distance learning, and having to navigate that is also a really big barrier for a lot of disadvantaged communities who don't have the resources and the funding in place for them. So I wanted to turn the focus over to Vanessa and really ask, I wanted to pose a question of how Proposition 15, how do you envision it benefiting our local schools and colleges, and really what is the strategy in terms of assessing how we can do that in the midst of so much turmoil and unprecedented issues that we're facing from the pandemic. Oh, you're muted, sorry.
How's that?
Perfect.
Okay, great. I should have it down by now. So when you're talking about 40% of $12 billion going towards K-12 and community colleges, that's a substantial amount of resources. And like Ben said, these are resources that were needed before the pandemic, but now it's worth more, right? Now these are lifelines. We learned from the last economic recession that when the economy is really bad, people start to access community colleges. And what we expect to see in enrollment could surpass what we saw in the last economic downturn. So we want to make sure that not only are we adequately funding the resources that we needed before, adequately funding our community colleges and our K-12 public education, but that we are also preparing for the influx that we will see, the increase that we will see of students turning to community colleges for support, for trainings, for accessibility to, four-year universities and so on. In Los Angeles County, where our organization is based out of, we are expecting $3.75 billion in LA County for local communities and schools. That is a huge and significant amount of revenue that's needed, particularly in the situation that we are facing. For the second largest school district in the country, Los Angeles Unified School District, you're looking at $360 million. And in a county where over nearly half of the population is Latino, and in a school district where over 75% are Latino, for Latino communities, this is a huge impact. And these are resources that are going to find themselves back following the highest need schools and following the highest need students. But it's also going to invest in the local areas that are going to be needed. Because as we know, when our communities are strong, we all have an opportunity to thrive. And Ben talked about those local services: public health, public transportation, housing, homeless services, senior services, parks and rec, libraries. These are all resources that contribute to making those communities stronger and being responsive, and also opening up access and opportunities for all people. And so, I think back to when I was in school, and I had, my generation, where I went to school in public school, we had access to weekly music classes. We had nurses that were on site Monday through Friday. Our libraries were open Monday through Friday. In my high school, I had five counselors available for a class of 600, which we thought was bad, right? Nowadays, that is looked at as a luxury. Those resources, those services are a dream of the past. And so we have to ask ourselves, what direction do we want to go in? Do we want to continue to limit the opportunities and to limit broadening the horizons for our students, for our children, and being able to create more access for them to thrive? Or do we actually want to fulfill our commitment to them? And do we want to be the Golden State that we have had the strongest reputation in being leaders in a number of different things and innovations? the amount of funding that we're talking about, while it is not the end-all solution, is a significant step in that direction. And it's a significant step in making the commitment to future generations that we want them to have the opportunities to thrive, that the opportunities that our generation and past generations have seen were just the beginning. It's time to change course, and it's time to ensure that all communities are able to access these opportunities and be able to thrive. You know, today we are facing an extraordinary moment, a dire health and racial equity crisis that our country has never seen before. And what we are saying with Proposition 15, which is very simple, is let's take this moment and make sure that we are passing a measure that actually puts our schools and our communities first in a moment that we most need it.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I think that was just very eloquently stated. And I just wanted to thank you. I know you just came from a rally in support of Prop 15. And so thank you for stopping by and joining the call after that event. And really, I wanted to also attest to, you know, the fact that a lot of funding is going to benefit our local community colleges. I think that, you know, being a student at UC Riverside, we have a really large share of transfer students from Riverside City College, from San Bernardino Valley, and Moreno Valley College. And I think that, you know, transfer students that I've met bring just such a great experience to the higher education landscape. And there's a lot of opportunity that we see with Prop 15 benefiting students' ability to access community colleges and also our primary education. So thank you both for joining us. And I really want to go ahead and shift our focus over to the next portion of our segment. So Vanessa and Ben, if y'all could also stick by with our Prop 16 guests, so that once we get to the Q&A portion at the end. But really quickly for the next segment, I wanted to introduce Shay Collins. She is the communications director with the Campaign for College Opportunity, and she's going to speak to us about how to ensure that your vote gets counted. So Shay.
Thanks, Vincent, and thank you to all the panelists that have spoken so far. We're so grateful to have you all and grateful to talk about these propositions that are really critical at this time. And we also want to make sure that our voters on the line, once they vote, can make sure their vote is counted. I know there's been a lot of questions about voting, especially at this time, voting during a pandemic. A lot has changed. There are a lot of safety protocols and just a lot of anxiety around it. So we wanted to just talk very briefly about how to make sure that we're voting safely and making sure our vote is counted. So the LA County Registrar Recorder's Office representative couldn't be here with us today, but they trained me to do this presentation, and then I also have them on speed dial. So if there are any questions that folks in the audience have that I can't answer, we will ask the representative and get back to you all about those questions. Can we go to the next slide? So like I said, voting at this time is a bit different because of the pandemic, but the state of California has taken several safety measures or created several protocols to make sure voters can feel safe while they're voting. And then there are also some safety measures that we as voters can take to make sure that we're feeling safe and still voting at this time. So first, what California has done is ensured that all registered voters have received vote by mail ballots. So if you registered, I believe it was back in early October, October 19th, you could have received a vote by mail ballot, similar to all vote by mail that we've done in the past, but it gives everyone the opportunity to vote by mail now. And then also we have protocols in place at the vote centers and at the polling places now, state protocols that ensure that everyone's 6 feet away when they're in the voting booth. And then also they've created a lot of a lot of measures to ensure folks are wearing masks, things are sanitized, and we'll get into a little bit about that in a minute. But also the state has created early voting opportunities. So in LA County, they've had 10 days of voting prior to the election, and then on election day, so there's 11 days of available voting. And then also other counties across the state, other counties across the state have created all other early voting opportunities. So there's just a lot of opportunity to vote prior to the election so that you're not standing in long lines, or voting on the day of and making sure that you're safe. So can we go to the next slide? One thing this time around, we have our official ballot drop boxes. So in addition to the mailbox, folks can go into any vote center, drop it off at any mailbox, and then also you'll see a lot of official drop boxes. In LA County, you can go to lavote.net and find where an official ballot drop box is closest to you. And then if you go to the Secretary of State's office, you can find them in other counties as well. But these vote boxes are spread out all across the city and all across the state, depending on what county you're in, so that you don't necessarily have to go into a vote center or a polling place. You can drop your ballot off at any one of these vote centers and it'll be counted. Can we go to the next slide? One thing I do want to just ensure, I know there's been a lot of news articles about folks not filling out their ballots correctly and their ballots not being counted. So one thing I like to tell folks is treat your ballot, read everything on your ballot, all of the instructions. I know some folks like to look at an instruction manual and then toss it and just work on the project, assemble whatever they want to do without the instruction manual. We want to treat our ballots not like that. We want to make sure that everything is read, because oftentimes things change depending on what county you're in. You might have moved. You want to make sure you're using the appropriate color that you're filling in your ballot with. So make sure you read all of those instructions and make sure you're placing your ballot in the official ballot envelope, sealing it, signing it, dating it, following any other instructions before you drop it into that ballot box or into that mailbox or return it to your vote center. Next slide, please. So I know a lot of folks had questions about when's the latest you can turn in your mail-in ballot. You want to make sure that your ballot is postmarked by election day, so you can return it to your post office before the post office close. Check the last pickup on your mailbox, the last pickup time, to make sure you're dropping it in at the appropriate time. And then also you can return it to a mail drop box, a ballot drop box or a vote center before 8 p.m. So the vote centers and the ballot boxes will close at 8 p.m. on election day. And they'll collect all of the boxes at that time. So just 8 p.m. is like the key time if you're going to an official drop box or to a vote center to drop in that ballot. Next slide, please. And if you are utilizing the vote by mail option, you have the opportunity to track your ballot. You can go to this california.ballottrack.net. I know some folks signed up earlier in the month or earlier in voting season, but it's not too late to sign up. You can always go in, go to the website and track your ballot that way. They'll ask for your information. And then you have the opportunity to receive updates as your ballot moves along. Next slide, please. So the LA County Registrar and Recorder's Office is really encouraging everyone that can vote by mail and can fill in that vote by mail ballot to do that. That is the safest method because there's no contact with anyone else. But there are a lot of times when folks have not received that ballot or haven't registered yet and want to register the day of, there are protocols in place if you need to go into a vote center or a polling place. So voters all will have to wear face coverings to enter into the vote center. If for some reason you don't want to wear a face covering, in LA County, they have curbside voting available for you. It's a bit of a longer process and usually reserved for folks that can't physically go into a polling place. So voters, everyone will be encouraged to cover their face with a mask or some sort of face covering. And that's really for your protection and the protection of every other voter and every other poll worker that is working in a vote center. The election workers will also be wearing gloves and masks, and they are having hand sanitizer at the exits and entries. They're enforcing social distancing during the check-in and when you're in the vote center or the ballot center. But they're also cleaning the ballot marking devices. In LA County, we have tablets that we vote on. So they will be in cleaning the devices between every voter, which makes the process a little longer if you're waiting in line. So like I said, if you can avoid the lines, you can just fill out your vote by mail ballot. That might be the best way to do it. But they're taking those protocols to make sure everyone can vote safely and feel healthy. And then if you would like gloves, or if you don't have a face covering or a mask, those are provided to you before you enter into the vote center. Next slide, please. A lot of folks don't know, but California has same-day registration. So if for some reason you're not registered to vote, you know, family and friends that aren't registered to vote yet, and they're eligible, tell them they can still sign up and register to vote and vote at their local voting center or polling place. And they don't have to wait until election day. Like I said, LA County has already started their voting process, so folks can go into a vote center now. And different counties have other early voting opportunities. So you can register today, you can register tomorrow, or you can register the day of the election and still have the opportunity to vote. To find out where, go to caearlyvoting.sos.ca.gov. I'll go ahead and post that into the chat for anyone who needs it. And you can find a local place to vote early or to register to vote and then vote. Next slide, please. So the latest you can vote in person, again, I mentioned that 8 o'clock time to cast your vote by mail ballot. The polling places and vote centers will close at 8. You must be in line to cast your ballot. I know someone asked me earlier this week, what if I'm in line and it's 8 o'clock? They're not turning folks away. They will make sure that everyone who's already in line by 8 can vote. So just make sure you're in line to vote by 8 p.m. or before 8 p.m. And then I believe we have one more question. Yes. So you don't have to bring anything to vote, and that holds true for most, for all elections in California. We're not a voter ID state. And even though we have received our mail-in ballots, you can leave that at home if you like. You don't need to bring anything, just show up, and then you'll have the opportunity to vote. I believe that's our last FAQ on here. If you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in the chat, and then if I cannot answer them, we will have, I will contact the LA County Registrar and Recorder's Office and make sure those questions get answered.
Alrighty, thank you, Shay. And did you also want to go into the Q&A at this time?
Yeah, so I saw a few questions, for one on Prop 15, or two on Prop 15 actually, one on 16. I'm gonna start with Ben. You mentioned earlier that residential properties aren't affected by Prop 15. I know there was a question about renters technically living in a building where, you know, the owner makes money. How does Proposition 15 affect rental properties and renters?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Prop 15 doesn't affect any residential property at all. So if you got a single family home, if you Airbnb your home, if you got a vacation home, if you have a mobile home, if you live in an assisted living facility, if you live in a giant apartment building with 10,000 units or just a small 4-unit apartment building, whatever it is, it will not be affected at all. And, you know, I really appreciate anyone sharing that information with folks. Again, there's so much misinformation out there. They're willing to say whatever they can to keep basically stealing money from our community. So please let folks know no residential property of any kind will be affected by Prop 15.
And then there was another question earlier. I believe you answered it, but can you tell us where folks can find out where that money is going? I've seen a lot of information where you can find out exactly where your county, how much money your county will receive. Where can folks find that information?
Yeah, so I really would encourage folks to go to the yeson15.org website. Right there, there's a drop-down menu where you can see the county revenue estimates for your county, and it specifically says exactly where the money is going to go. Again, this is all local money, up to $12 billion a year. Again, I just spend so much of my time these days just sort of saying, don't believe what you hear from the opposition. They're trying to say this is all money that's not going to go to our schools or not going to go to our communities, but it actually is, and you can see it right there on our website.
Thanks, Ben. There was a question about Prop 16, Luke. I'm gonna pose this one to you. And Vincent, please chime in. If you feel, there's a question as we discuss Prop 16 and the effects of affirmative action. How does definitive affirmative action differ from the multiple programs that have been created within the state and on college campuses to provide better access for students?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak directly to that. So the programs that colleges have right now are oftentimes targeted towards diverse populations, oftentimes looking at specific schools, looking at specific districts, or even specific regions. When they do so, though, the programs don't have a specific focus on, say, we're going to recruit Black students, or we're going to recruit Latinx students. It's going to be targeted effort. So I know, like, for example, my institution, we have compacts, we have agreements, MOUs with certain districts, and historically those districts have yielded higher percentages of students of color, but we can't use those specific agreements that we have in place to say, hey, here's someone who has X background, and because of that background, as part of a comprehensive process, we're going to use that to holistically consider them. If we also think about retention programs currently operate in the same way too. So if I have a retention program, which I do, right? We have one for Latinx students, Black students, we have one for pretty much every single subpopulation. But how they work is it's open to people who have an interest in African-American identity and issues, or in Latinx culture and history. But I can't say that it is specifically targeted for this group because we're not allowed to do that. The other thing that I got to say that Prop 16 is going to address, and I think Vince talked to this much more than I could, but there's also a lot of about what time does and does not do. And it's become to the point where you can have a one district that has a lawyer who interprets it incredibly narrowly in a way that it can't be used to do anything, right? And you can have somebody who says, oh, well, yes, it says that, but there's also these other things that we can take into account. And so a lot of what I think is going to be the benefit of it is really getting rid of the fluff that's in the middle, where you have people who either make interpretations that are ill-informed or make statements and say that broad strokes, we can't do X when there's nothing that would actually prevent it from taking place. So I actually think that's one of the biggest benefits of it, is cleaning up a lot of the misunderstanding.
Yeah, I can add to that because Luke's right. In some ways, what Luke has been able to do is more the exception than the rule. And for the most part, when you look at local governments and different public agencies, people don't want to explore disparities if they don't believe there's anything that can be done about it, right? And so so that's one. And then secondly, people who don't want to just explore disparities because they don't care about them, then are given an excuse not to, right? And so one of the main benefits of repealing this ban on affirmative action is to start the conversation, to identify in different parts of our society how different groups are facing barriers, and then to try and develop interventions and solutions to those problems. All of this has to be done within the constraints of federal law. And so you can't just sort of rush out and say, oh, we're going to start hiring like from this community. There are steps. You have to identify that there is, in fact, some type of discrimination or disparity happening. And then you also have to see under federal law whether or not that problem can be addressed through race and gender neutral solutions. And then if there are no race or gender neutral solutions, the solutions that you develop cannot be solely based on race and gender. Though those can be one of many factors. So it's I think like the best of both worlds. Like we were able to make sure we take affirmative steps to level the playing field for people of color and women, but without overreach and without sort of policies that may end up being too sweeping in nature.
Thank you. I know at the Campaign for College Opportunity, we talk to a lot of institutions to find out what they're doing to close their racial equity gaps, and we get a lot of varying responses to both of your points. Some colleges are saying, because of 209, our hands are tied, we can't do anything, and some colleges are a lot more proactive. And so I think Prop 16 will definitely clear up what is and isn't possible, and really give colleges and universities the opportunity to address race in a way that they haven't been able to since early 90s. We have one other question. This one's for me, actually. Someone asked, you stated to bring nothing to vote. Why did they create the check-in barcode? Which I thought replaced showing an ID to vote. So if you are going in person to vote, they did send in your mail-in ballot, a little barcode that you can present and they'll scan. That just replaces you having to give them your name. So it makes the check-in time a little faster. That's really the only thing that the barcode does. You can take it if you like, you can leave it at home. If you take it, they'll scan it, they'll have your name and information already on there so they don't have to manually look for it, and then just send you right in to vote. But no, you don't have to take that barcode with you if you don't want to. It's just really to make it easier on the election workers to be able to find your name and your information before they send you in to vote. But you don't have to bring it in. It's not a replacement for the voter ID. Like, it's not a voter ID replacement. You can literally just walk in. I think that wraps up the Q&A portion. If you all have questions that arise after this event, you can send them to info@collegecampaign.org and we'll try to answer them for you. I really want to thank everyone for being here today, especially our MC, Vincent. You've been amazing. We're so glad to have you. For folks that don't know, Vincent is the co-chair at the UC Student Association, and Vincent also joins as a student in the Campaign for College Opportunities Student Leadership Institute, and really trained with us on advocacy, higher education advocacy on his campus and also in Sacramento. And so we're so grateful to have you here today, Vincent, and we're so grateful to have all the guests that spoke with us today. We have 2 more events in our toolkit for this year as part of our event series, our Advancing Higher Education Equity series. Our next event will be addressing transfer and will feature Secretary of State Alex Padilla and Assemblymember Mark Berman, and we're super excited for that. So stay tuned. We'll send out the information and make sure that everyone who would like to attend can attend. And thank you again for being here, everyone.